You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This week's episode is going to be about life on Bitcoin, and I've got some special guests. But before we talk about that, I just want to make a quick announcement. I have set up a Facebook group for The Voluntary Life called The Voluntary Life Community. I mentioned that a couple of episodes ago, and I just want to let you know that if you're interested in connecting with other listeners of The Voluntary Life, I really recommend that you check out the Facebook group. And also, I've put a map on the Facebook group for people who are interested in organizing meetups to put a tag on the map and show where they are. And if you'd like to connect with other people in your area who have similar interests and who are listeners of Voluntary Life, check it out, put yourself on the map, and hopefully you guys can arrange to meet up. I will also put a link to the map in the show notes so that you can find that. If you're not on Facebook, you can just go directly to the map. And if you have a website or something, then you can put a link for yourself there. So I hope you are able to use that opportunity to organize meetups. I know some people in Europe are already interested in organizing one, and hopefully that will help others do so too. So now I'd like to welcome my guests for this week's show. We are in Panama, and I'm here with Tur and Becca. Hi.
Hey, Jake.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm really keen to talk to you guys about life on Bitcoin and about your life traveling as perpetual travelers. But first of all, I think it'd probably be interesting for people to hear a little bit about your backgrounds. So would you like to just say a little bit about where you're from and what your background is?
Yeah, I'm known online as Tur de Meester, so people see me around on Twitter usually, or I have some writings published on CoinDesk and some other Zero Hedge and other places. My background is economics, and then gradually that moved into financial advice. I had a financial newsletter in Belgium and Holland, Macro Trends, did that for 3 years, and then now we're working on the launch of the Adamant newsletter, and that will be in English. And yeah, I have been traveling a lot, and that has become more perpetual. Somewhere about a year and a half ago, it became more permanent and moving away from Belgium, my home country.
Awesome. And I will ask you more about your finance background. But how about you, Becca? Where are you from?
I'm from the US. I'm from New England. My background, I would say, is lightly in some business administration, but I really enjoy writing and editing. I have a BA in communications. But yeah, I got into Bitcoin. I first heard about it maybe mid-2012, and then finally, early 2013, I decided I needed to learn more about this, so I kind of self-educated, figured out what it was, and started buying some. I mined a bit, and then, yeah, since then I've been dabbling here and there in some Bitcoin organizations, and then got into Adamant Research.
Yes. Now, I remember you mentioned before, earlier on in one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that when you got interested in Bitcoin, it was still very early days and you had to try and find out where you could even buy any and so forth. What was that like?
It was a bit weird. I remember thinking, at first I kind of dismissed it. It was like some other fad. I had heard about it on some podcasts or some people talking about it in New Hampshire and the Free State Project, the libertarian people. And so finally, when it wouldn't go away, I kept hearing about it. I thought I should learn more, and I forget the name now, it's defunct, but the company that I was using to first buy, do you remember?
Maybe TradeHill?
No, it was BitInstant or something.
One of those early exchanges.
Yeah, and so it's a wire transfer, it's or something, I go to the local store and I'm paying my bill, or it was a bit strange, a bit surreal, but yeah, it was pretty exciting. It was cool to go run back to my apartment and look on my computer and see I had these Bitcoins. So,
right. And Tur, I know that you are actually one of the first people from the investment world to have recommended Bitcoin. Can you tell me a little bit more about your background and how you got involved, and also how you became one of the first investors to really talk about Bitcoin as an opportunity?
Yeah, so I think it probably starts with my interest in Austrian economics, because they really make a point to study the history of banking, study the history of money, and to deconstruct the structure of financial booms and busts. And then you get to the heart of some of the problems, which is fractional reserve banking, which is fiat currency, money that can be printed as much as the printers like. And obviously, people who are well-versed in Austrian economics often look for alternatives. And so I had been studying gold and silver. That I think that's still something that I is important to understand. But I was also open to explore other possibilities of private monies, private opportunities. And so I was traveling in Argentina in 2011, and that's where I first heard about Bitcoin. And this was around the time when I launched the newsletter. So I was occupied with some other things for a while, but I did research it.
This was a financial newsletter that you launched?
Yeah. So people would pay an annual subscription fee, and and it was also my first one, so I had a bit of stage fright, if you will. So it took me some months to really muster up the courage to start writing about it, but I did pretty early on, actually. And then from January 2012, I started recommending people to buy it. But then, as Becca was referring to, it was pretty challenging to find ways to actually go out and buy it, and then also to store it. Back then, there were no hardware wallets that you could use. There were no trusted Bitcoin banks and those kind of things. So that was... a lot of people were very skeptical, and these were people that were paying me money to give them good advice. So that was pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah. Now, I should say, for people who are sort of wondering about Bitcoin, there are some previous shows that we've done on The Voluntary Life. I've got a couple of interviews with Stephanie Murphy that I'll put links in the show notes. So if you want a background to Bitcoin and what it is and how to get in, how to take interest in it, if you are interested, I will put links to that in the show notes. But maybe you could just give the very brief summary of what is Bitcoin for people who aren't already in the know.
Bitcoin is money for the internet. Bitcoin is also a payment network. It's completely decentralized. It's based on open source software, so anybody can just verify the code. And basically it allows you to send money to whoever you want in the world, from anywhere in the world, and nobody can stop you, and at a cost of virtually nothing. So maybe it is the internet of money, because on top of this network, we'll also be able to emit shares, for example, in companies, or register real estate on this ledger. All these kind of things are possible, and I really think it's a new paradigm in finance, and we'll see more and more of it. If you take the analogy with the internet, we're probably around 1993, so we're still a little bit before that big Windows 95 moment, but we are getting closer to it, I think.
Right. Fascinating. So I'm really interested in hearing more about your life on Bitcoin and how you actually use Bitcoin and how it helps you in your life of travel. But maybe first of all, we could talk a little bit about your life of travel. So, where are you guys now? What's your experience of travel, and how did you come to be living abroad?
For me, my interest in traveling abroad was I wanted a second leg, is what I called it back then. I felt uneasy about the economy, felt uneasy about how much debt there was in Europe, and felt uneasy about having a desk job in general. So I focused more and more on being active on the internet, trying to be independent somehow. And then I started traveling to Latin America because I thought that was a continent that had potential, that had a fairly low cost of living, that offered opportunities for entrepreneurs online because you can find low tax jurisdictions there. And so from 2011 onwards was when I started seriously considering building a second home, or at least exploring this continent with the idea of possibly moving there.
Cool. And how about you, Becca?
Travel was something I always really dreamed about, but I didn't have the means to do for a very long time until quite recently. So, and some of it was not having means, and some of it is what is involved. I didn't have a lot of experience, and so I have some food allergies, and I guess you could say I'm a creature of comfort, and I didn't know how much I could be comfortable while traveling to different places, especially maybe countries that are not first world. Yeah, using Bitcoin as part of our travel. So I guess first, more recently, we have been traveling quite a lot. So I'm from the US, as we said, and Tor is from Belgium, and we're not going to have the US be our location for now. So we've been hopping all around. We've been in Mexico a bit. We're in Panama now. We were in Europe for a short while, and Bitcoin really allows me to feel more comfortable with travel in a way that I didn't know was possible. Once we can talk more about that too, but once we have the accounts set up, it's really a lot easier to get around and to get what you need once we have the Bitcoin, which we can turn into whatever the local currency is.
Yeah, because I want to ask about that, because I've done, as I've mentioned before, I've done some episodes on Bitcoin in the past, and in the past we've talked about, okay, what is Bitcoin? Is it something that is going to work? Is it an investment? And these types of questions. And I think we're at a stage now, and especially where we're at now in terms of Bitcoin's development, but also with the opportunity to talk to you guys, I'm interested in talking more about how you actually use Bitcoin and how you live off Bitcoin. Because if I understand rightly, the majority of your net worth is actually in Bitcoin. Is that right?
Yeah, for the moment that's the case. That's definitely the case. Over time, I plan to diminish that, but that's true. As far as like what Becca was saying about the ease of use and the kind of benefits that come from Bitcoin if you are a perpetual traveler, I also experienced that. Like any city we travel to, there is always this idea that, what if one of our credit cards fails? What if there's something wrong? What if we lose a credit card? And then I always come back to like, we can just find somebody who will buy some Bitcoins from us, and then we'll have cash right there. So it's a really nice backup. But also, remittance is fairly expensive in various countries. So for you to take money out of the wall, actually we tried it just here in Panama. We do have a bank account here, but we hadn't figured out how something worked, so we used a US credit card, and we found out not only were we charged $4 at the ATM itself, but then on top of that there was an additional $11, I think, that the bank charged. So these kind of costs you can eliminate by setting up, and it's pretty easy, a local account. So basically an account with a local Bitcoin exchange, for example here in Panama, or if you go to Mexico or elsewhere, you only have to scan your passport, maybe show a proof of residence from wherever country you're from, and then what they can do is basically have local currency available for you, and they'll send it immediately to your bank account. So sometimes you can have same day deposits based on you selling Bitcoins, and I think that's really something very useful. Also, if you're going to send money around, like all of a sudden Bitcoins is an account in the cloud. It doesn't matter where you are, it's always available. You don't have to worry about sending money from the UK to Mexico. You go to the cloud first, and then you can pull it out wherever you are.
Right. So really, the way that you're using it is your money is effectively in the cloud, as you say, in Bitcoin. And then for day-to-day life, you still really need to get down into the local currency and have a local account or just be able to get local currency. We're not yet at the stage where you can really just spend Bitcoin on your sort of everyday expenses.
That is true to some extent. I would say that's true for like 85% of your expenses. Yeah, you just use local currency. But there's various instances in which we have used Bitcoin directly, not because we're Bitcoin purists and we just have to use it no matter what the cost or the time cost, but because it's cheaper. For example, we use Purse.io for Amazon purchases, which often saves us 15 to 20%.
Can you just explain a bit more about how that works?
Sure. You want to explain it?
I'll try. So there's people who basically work for Amazon. It's like Amazon Mechanical Turk, I think, is one of them, or maybe there's more. And they get paid in Amazon credit. And so now they have like all sorts of Amazon credit, and they can't possibly use all of it. And so when we purchase something through Purse, we are paying this person in Bitcoin to use their credit to purchase our item and to ship it to us. And so you get these deep discounts because they're very happy to get rid of their credits, which they have lots of, and receive Bitcoin, which they can easily turn into whatever their local currency is, wherever they are in the world. So it's really, really convenient. It's really fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, so you use that for basically every time you purchase anything on Amazon.
Yes.
And what kind of discount do you get?
It depends. There's sort of like a slider, and however, the more you purchase, the deeper your discount you can get. But also, the deeper the discount, often it takes longer to fill. Sometimes people won't want to fill it. I think the most you can go is like 30%.
Right.
I think you can go lower to 50, but then it might take more days, and sometimes people can bite and then they cancel. Like it's a bit more unpredictable the lower you go. But then again, you can order an iPad or an iMac or like pretty expensive items and get these deep discounts. It's definitely worth a try. I think on average, what would you say? I think we get about a 15 to 20% discount. And
cool.
You get automatic Amazon Prime, so shipping is free and faster than if you are a usual Amazon customer.
Cool. And you mentioned that some other things that you buy with Bitcoin as well, not because, as you say, you're purist, but because it is actually just easier. So what other kind of things are you actually directly using Bitcoin for?
One of the things that happens is often we'll have like last minute booking needs. Like we book an Airbnb or we book a hotel or we book a flight. And it just happened a few weeks ago that we had some problem with the bank and we couldn't access, or basically we couldn't pay online with our credit card. And we then went to Expedia and booked our flight using Expedia, paying in Bitcoin. And there was no way we could have done that at that moment because we had this problem with banks. So it's a fantastic backup. There's a lot of, sometimes you pay a little bit more. I think in this case we didn't. It was the same price, but it's just always there, and it's hassle free. I don't know if you can think of other things that we've used Bitcoin for. There's like for buying cash locally, we've definitely done that. If you just arrive in a new country, you don't have a bank account yet, you go on Facebook, maybe you know somebody, or you're in a Facebook group and you know somebody who lives there local, or you go to localbitcoins.com, just find someone, meet them in a bar, and buy however much currency you need to get through the next week or 2 weeks. And that's maybe enough for you to set up the bank account or find other ways to get by. And in doing so, you forfeit all the additional banking cost of using your foreign credit card.
Right. I do want to ask you about one of the aspects of life on Bitcoin, which I think is obviously a really important one. And that is dealing with the volatility, because, the Bitcoin price is infamously volatile. And if you have the majority of your net worth in Bitcoin, then you're living with that volatility. And so what's that like?
Yeah, it's very unique. It's very, I imagine it's hard to relate to for, people who come from different backgrounds. Basically you see your net worth go up 700% and then crash down 80% and then go up again with 400%. And so what has been helpful for me is to prepare for that, is to really psychologically look in the mirror, talk to a friend or talk to my fiance and say, all right, how do we feel about the Bitcoin price going to $100? How do we feel about that? Are we going to still stick around and not sell? Is there a point at which we would sell? Just really work it through and talk it through so that you don't do the wrong thing at the wrong time. And also prepare materially speaking, have a buffer so that when the price does do crazy things, be it up or down, you don't have to drill into that well. You can just have it be for a long-term your long-term exposure. Of course, looking back, late 2013, I did call the double top. I did think that the price was going to decline. But this rally came so quickly, and I was doing a lot of travel as well at the time, and there were some other circumstances that also legally I wasn't 100% sure about what I could or could not do. And
you mean because of the tax situation not being clear on Bitcoin and what would happen if you sold and stuff?
That was part of that. Yeah, exactly. And so I did sell a bit, and it did give me a buffer, but in hindsight I would have wanted to sell some more. And then that would have been ideal. And so that's why I'm preparing now. If there is a new rally, I do feel more prepared to build more of that alternative buffer so that I can have my Bitcoin savings for the long term. And I think in general it's wise to diversify. out of Bitcoin. I think initially I did great. I invested only a fairly small percentage of my net worth in Bitcoin. But then the question is, what do you do if that grows? If that becomes really big, do you then, something you often talk about with passive investing, like do you trim it down and then allocate it into your other baskets or not?
Yeah, and I guess you've got to be able to deal with the psychological stress if you're going to be in such a volatile asset for the majority of your income. But it sounds like this is something that you do spend a lot of time sort of thinking about and working out how you're going to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've discovered or experienced in my interactions with my subscribers to the newsletter is that that is something that's often lacking in with investors, is just considering like, well, what is your wife gonna say, right? If you plunk 50% of your net worth into something and all of a sudden it goes down 40%, yeah, you can have all kinds of theories about why it's gonna go up again and this and that, but are you willing to, have it cost your marriage? That is serious stuff. I think you really have to think things through and prepare yourself and your family for what might happen and that's also why I recommend investing in Bitcoin with not more than 10% of your assets, at least not if you have a family life or if that's something that's out there in the near future.
What are your thoughts about living with the volatility, Becca?
I would say that at least for me, it's the most difficult aspect of living on Bitcoin. We really have to emotionally prepare, and having those conversations with your spouse or with yourself to really think about what am I going to do if the price drops to 100, or how am I going to deal with this? What if it goes even lower? We've had to have those discussions, like what if Bitcoin disappears or it doesn't work anymore? How are we going to get back up? How are we going to make a living? And it's tough, it's really scary, and it's super, super important to talk about that stuff. And then you get to rejoice when it goes up, and you get to make plans in that way too. So it's positive and also nerve-wracking, challenging.
Do you find that, because we've had sort of this period of the last 2 years after the massive boom or the massive price spike, we've had this period where there's been a kind of bear market, and now we're on the way up again. Do you find that actually influences your own emotions? Is it like being on that roller coaster?
Yeah, we have literally had sleepless nights where just waking up in the middle of the night, checking the price, it really affects our lives in a tangible way. So also self-care is pretty important, taking care of ourselves so that we can handle these emotional ups and downs that come with the price. That's really important to surviving, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely impacted. Like you're asking about if the price goes up, does it impact us in a positive way? I don't know. I don't think it's like black or white, like, oh, if it goes down, it's negative. Because also, for me, for example, with the newsletter, I was focused on launching close to the bottom, because I didn't want to be like a Bitcoin pumper being like, the price is at the all-time high and now I'm launching my newsletter and everybody buy and subscribe to my newsletter. I was actually very bent on trying to go live with the newsletter and our publication when it was close to the bottom, because I wanted to make that journey with people all the way up, or whatever positive story happens. And so I've actually felt a bit bummed out that it went up faster than I had hoped, because we had it just took time to set up the business, and I'm really happy that we have our report it came out last month, which was called How to Position for the Rally in Bitcoin. The price is now 20-30% higher, so I feel good about that. I feel like people are able to to access that information and position themselves or I hope that it helps them position themselves in a responsible way. So it's not black and white. It definitely affects me emotionally, but in many different ways, I would say.
Right. And just so that people know, that your report is a free report, which I'll put a link to in the show notes, so people who are interested can get a hold of that. And the report is from your new business, which is an investment newsletter specifically about or centered around Bitcoin and sort of similar kinds of investment opportunities that you're going to talk about. Is that right?
I would say I've been reading this book, and I think that what was being explained there made sense to me. I'm not going to repeat the thesis of the book, but the main idea is that the economy, ever since 2008, you could say, has been returning to like this steady state idea of like, oh, we have stability and growth in stock markets. We have rising bond markets. It's been a 30-year bull market in bonds that's still going on. Adamant research is focused on preparing for the end of that era of seeming stability, and actually preparing for dislocations in markets. So we'll be focused on being in cash, how to be liquid, how to be flexible, and how to invest in some areas that are somewhat on the fringes, but could do very well despite whichever scenario. And then also investments that could do very well, especially if there is very high volatility, market crashes, those kind of things. That is the focus of that's been the focus of my life the past 7 years, and that's also the focus of this newsletter.
And when is Adamant? So the report is out now, and Adamant is going to be launching as a newsletter in the new year. Is that right?
In the new year, for sure. I can't say for sure which month it's going to be, but I expect it to be in the first season of the new year.
And you mentioned that also your business is going to be effectively running on Bitcoin, even though you will be taking payment using other payment systems. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We haven't finalized everything, but it looks like we'll be working with a company that accepts credit cards, so Visa, MasterCard, and also Bitcoin, and then will pay me out in Bitcoin. So wherever I am, I will be able to access those funds for the business. And I really like that. I think it's a very fast solution to my need. I think we are going to put most of that money back into dollars because we want to be able to give people refunds. So I don't want to expose my clients to the volatility in Bitcoin. There will be a grace period. People subscribe. If they don't like the content, they get their money back. So I want to be able to pay out the dollar equivalent. But yeah, I'm really happy with this Bitcoin solution. It fits really well into my theory that Bitcoin really helps people. This is a very concrete example of how, in our case, it helps us service clients in a better and a faster way.
So do you see yourself and the market generally just becoming more and more adapted towards cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin? And do you see your own life just using Bitcoin more and more as time goes by?
I hope so. I look forward to when Bitcoin is just a part of life. It's not something special. It's just in everyday use, and I think it can really make life improved. Yeah,
like I was just reminded of, there's been, I don't know how many times, but definitely a dozen times over the past months that I was like throwing up my hands in the air and being like, God damn it, like why don't they just use Bitcoin or allow us for like these banks, like maybe for people who live in one country and don't cross borders that much, it's not that visible, things kind of work, but once you work internationally, it can be a nightmare. Like it can take sometimes 2 weeks for money to like arrive from somewhere, or then you send money to Canada and then you find out like, oh, it never arrived, it bounced, but it's not in your usual account. They made a new account for you, and now all of a sudden it's in Canadian dollars, and you didn't know about that. And I'm sure you had your own horror stories with traditional banks. So man, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's definitely true. You don't really see this if you just live in one country and go on holiday, because you then just spend from your credit card while you're on holiday and pay the fees. But when you actually move around, and if you live more internationally, you really start to see just how clunky the traditional banking system is and how expensive it can be. And there are a few companies out there that can make it, even within the traditional banking system, a bit cheaper to do transfers. But still, we've definitely experienced that from leaving England, just realizing, wow, it's really expensive moving money around and really, really clunky too. And it's slow. And we've had, transfers that there was an error and we had to pay the fee twice and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I can definitely see that. Well, I'm not obviously I'm not a financial advisor or really a speculator, but I have to ask you too, since you're in this field of analysis, what you think of where we're at in the Bitcoin market now and where you think it's going.
I think we're at a very, very exciting spot. We had a 2-year correction, winter, whatever you call it, bear market. And despite that, in the past 3 years, $900 million has flowed into the Bitcoin ecosystem as VC, venture capital. That's a significant amount. And of course, we've seen businesses fail and businesses consolidate. The quality of the teams has improved a lot. And we're seeing some very, very interesting things being developed. And I'm talking about scalability for one. So scalability solutions are very tangible and they will very likely be implemented in the next few months, basically allowing for more than the maximum of 5 transactions per second in Bitcoin. That's now the cap. We will go beyond that. We see new protocol layers that are being built on top of Bitcoin. This is not like, oh, somebody starts thinking about it today. No, this has been in the works for 2 years, but now we're actually seeing those layers being implemented. We're seeing companies come out, and I'm talking about sidechains in particular. Sidechains, the Lightning Network is also a technology that will be probably used inside of sidechains. Basically, sidechains allow people to move Bitcoins to this new layer and then add additional functionality to those Bitcoins, allow them to be transferred way faster than what's possible in the Bitcoin blockchain, or allow anonymous transactions to happen, so-called confidential transactions, which is very difficult in the Bitcoin blockchain, or to emit shares in this environment of sidechains to create stock markets, basically. All these things are possible, and they don't affect the security of the main Bitcoin blockchain. That's the beauty of it. And I feel really excited about that. I think it's underappreciated. And then, of course, we have the volatility in the traditional markets that's increasing. We also see volatility in currencies. I mean, the Australian dollar dropped 35% over the past 2 years. In Mexico, the peso has gone down 20-30% as well. In Brazil, even more. Russia, even more. So all this oil price has hit, I don't know what it is, probably like 5-year lows. We're at $37 now for a barrel. So all this volatility is dislocating markets, and banks are going to get in trouble because of it. Banks are very leveraged, and that means either they have to print way more money, so we have inflation down the road, or we see banks go bankrupt, and then we have this deflationary nightmare where, like in Cyprus, people have to wait in line. And this is a Goldilocks scenario for Bitcoin, because it's money in the cloud, it's completely independent from all these shenanigans. So I see that as a very bullish sign for Bitcoin. Also, just technically looking at the price, if you see a huge rally, and then a 2-year consolidation period, of which the last 12 months, Bitcoin was trading in a range between $200 and $300. Well, now we just broke out of that. In the past 2 months, it's gone above that. I think that is just for any chartist, even somebody who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin will say, oh, that looks very bullish, that looks very positive. The only thing I want to add is that I am prepared to be surprised. Bitcoin is a new asset class. It's only been in existence for 7 years. It's only had a price for 5 years. There's nothing like it in the world. It's not gold. It's not a stock. It's not fiat money. So I expect to be surprised totally.
Right.
So I do take my own, predictions with a grain of salt. I really try to prepare myself for different scenarios. But that being said, I think there is no. I think it's the best asset in terms of risk reward, and everybody should have at least a little bit of exposure to Bitcoin, even if it's 0.5% of your cash. Even if it's that, just go out and buy a little bit and see what happens.
Cool. Well, it's really fascinating hearing about your life on Bitcoin and your ideas about where it's going. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jake.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.